Today on Ascend, the Great Books podcast, I invited Dr. Daniel Shields of Wyoming Catholic College to come discuss teaching First Alcibiades to freshmen. Wyoming Catholic has all their freshmen read this text, and Dr. Shields shares his insights and observations on how it is received and why it serves as such a good introduction to Plato and philosophy. Two quick housekeeping items. First, go check out our guide to First Alcibiades. It's 16 pages of wonderful information to help you read the dialogue, good for you or your small group. And be looking for our upcoming guide on Plato's Euthyphro as we start that discussion next week. Second, go check out our new project, The Ascent, on Substack, where we are exploring the soul's ascent to God through all that is true, good, and beautiful. But today, join us for a great conversation on teaching First Alcibiades with Dr. Daniel Shields. Welcome to Ascend, the Great Books podcast. My name is Deacon Garlick. I'm a husband, father, and serve as the Chancellor and General Counsel for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Tulsa. We are recording, as always, on a beautiful evening here in Oklahoma. You can check us out at YouTube and Twitter and X and Facebook and Patreon. We appreciate all our supporters. You can go to thegreatbookspodcast.com, where we have guides and articles and other things to help you through the great books. Today, we are discussing First Alcibiades by Plato, and particularly its place at Wyoming Catholic College and how they introduce all of their new students via this dialogue. Today, we have a wonderful guest. We have Dr. Daniel Shields, who earned his undergraduate at Thomas Aquinas College and his PhD at Catholic University of America. He specializes in philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas and medieval philosophy more generally, as well as moral philosophy, philosophy of nature, and a history of science. Dr. Shields, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so just tell us a little bit about your role at Wyoming Catholic.
So I'm an associate professor there. I teach primarily philosophy and science. So I regularly have been teaching the first semester class, the logic class, where we read Alcibiades, and also philosophy of nature, but I've been moving around teaching all sorts of things in the philosophy and science track.
So Wyoming Catholic, like when I think of Wyoming Catholic, what I think of is these wonderful photos that I find online, mainly on X, of like Eucharistic processions through fields, and there's like students on horseback and things like this. Do you ride a horse? Is this part of like the ministry at Wyoming Catholic that everyone has to do?
I do not ride a horse, or I rarely have, but that's something that I would like to do. But there's the students all learn how to ride horses as part of the program. And some of them kind of embrace it and take it to heart and go beyond the class that's required of everyone. And some of them learn to be quite good riders.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I'm assuming then like the horseback riding, which is, for all the students, which is it's a wonderful thing to see nowadays. I'm assuming there's like a lot of virtue building in that, learning
Yes.
how to actually be one with the animal and work with them and intuit things and take control. I mean, there's my daughter does horseback riding, and it's not an easy task at times.
Yes. They say that the horses can really intuit or feel what their rider is feeling. And so to ride well, one has to have a sort of self-possession and in order to be a good leader. So virtue is emphasized, but also leadership skills are emphasized in the horsemanship program.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's such a unique aspect of that college that always really captures my imagination. But I agree with what you say, because, I'll go and watch my daughter ride. And, of course, it's like, here's this pony or horse or whatever it is that's very spirited, and for the first 15, 20 minutes, all it does is test the rider. That's all it does. It just tests to see like, how much can I get away with? If you tell me to go left, can I go right? Can I just stop? And so it's really wonderful, I think, for her own formation. I'm assuming for the formation of the students to kind of find that inner spiritedness of themselves, maybe even that thumos, the thumotic side, and actually be able to have that self-confidence to actually ride a horse well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's very good. So along with horsemanship, you also introduced them to First Alcibiades. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what is the context of that? Is this like something that all the freshmen read? Is it just in their freshman course? Like, how did First Alcibiades come to kind of have this like prime place amongst the students?
Well, it's read as the first, for the first class of the philosophy track. So our first semester, the students take logic, and much of that course is taken up with the nuts and bolts of Aristotelian logic, syllogisms, and what have you. But before diving into that, we have a segment of Platonic dialogues so that the students can kind of get to know what philosophy is all about, and that logic is, although necessary, it's not really what the philosophy track is about. This is just a tool for the rest of the philosophy track and other parts of the curriculum. But they need to get a sense of why they should do this by reading some Platonic dialogues, something that has some content and drama that can make them fall in love with philosophy. And so we do a series of 3 of them, Alcibiades, Cratylus, and Meno, before diving into Aristotle. And the Alcibiades, as you know, was traditionally the first dialogue that students of Platonism in the ancient world were introduced to. And so we start with that to introduce them to the character of Socrates and the kind of drama of Platonic philosophy before moving on to other things.
When you introduce them to First Alcibiades, do you present it as an authentic dialogue with Plato?
I'm upfront with the students and say that we don't know for sure whether or not it was authored by Plato himself. There's disagreement among scholars. It might have been, but whether it was or not, it is an ancient dialogue, clearly written by a Platonist who knew his Plato, and that there's a tradition in the Platonic school of reading this dialogue. So, in a sense, whether or not it was written by Plato, it's still authentic.
Yeah, my disposition tends to be that, it came down to us from antiquity as a Platonic dialogue, and that tends to be how I receive it. My understanding is that it was only attacked later by the Germans in kind of the same methodology that they attacked scripture, if that makes sense, right? The JEDP, the German higher criticism. So I tend to be somewhat skeptical of that and just default more to receiving it as an authentic dialogue, because I think I don't want people to get hung up on the authorship too much, because I think sometimes if we do that, if we get caught up in that, then it can block us or somewhat impede us from actually kind of extracting the beauty, or at least being open to the beauty that's actually in the dialogue itself.
Yeah, that's right.
So when your freshmen are sitting there in philosophy and they're like, why do we have to read First Alcibiades? Like, what's your kind of go-to answer for that?
Well, honestly, they haven't given me that question. But if they did ask that question, I think I would respond kind of as I already have, is that there is a long tradition of beginning here. But I also, in addition to just the tradition, which is always kind of good to defer to, unless one's got a good reason not to, is that the Alcibiades is it's easier to follow the argument in that dialogue than in most other Platonic dialogues. And the students who are freshmen are still just getting their feet under them. Right? They just like when you're on a boat at sea, it takes a little while to get your sea legs. Right? They need to learn how to have a conversation with one another, have a seminar class, and they need to learn how to read a text. And Alcibiades is a good fit for learning those skills because it's somewhat easier to interpret than the other Platonic dialogues, and it's very accessible.
I certainly agree. Yeah, it is. It's much more accessible. It's more straightforward. It has less of the drama in it, I guess. Like if you read the Symposium, there's like a lot of movement, like where people are sitting, how they're affected by wine. Like there's a lot of these kind of analogs. First Alcibiades tends to be very straightforward, as much as Plato tends to be straightforward.
And I do introduce the dialogue with a brief introduction of who Alcibiades was historically. and the controversy there was between the Athenians and Socrates and Alcibiades, and how he was blamed by some people for how Alcibiades turned out. But I don't say a lot about that because we need to dive into the text. I don't want to just be lecturing them about things outside the text. And they're going to learn more about Alcibiades later, some of the other classes. So I just give them a heads up that there's more to come about this young man.
Yeah, Alcibiades' identity seems to be very central to the text itself. So here on the podcast, we've had an introduction to Alcibiades in a historical context, looking at Plutarch's lives. So we have an episode there. And then we kind of have 2 episodes kind of doing a deep dive on First Alcibiades as a dialogue. But I'm curious though, like when you kind of give a snapshot of who Alcibiades is to your students, like how do you describe him?
I say that he was a very talented and gifted young man who engaged in and took part in the political life of Athens, and that he ended up being leader of Athenian forces in their war against the Spartans, but that things ended up turning up badly. He turned traitor, joined the Spartans, turns traitor again, joins the Persians, and ends up more or less assassinated. And the ventures that he leads Athens on turn out to be disastrous for Athens. And it was publicly known that as a young man he was spending time with Socrates and learning from him. And so there was a point of contention there. Did Alcibiades turn out so badly because of Socrates' influence? Socrates, as you know, was condemned by the Athenians for corrupting the youth, right, and executed for that. But of course, Plato wants to turn it around and say, no, the problem with Alcibiades was that he didn't stick with Socrates. If he had remained with Socrates, things would have turned out very differently.
But why is it Alcibiades? So here, because like one thing that caught my attention is like, okay, here's this dialogue. It is meant to introduce people to the Platonic teachings, but really what it's doing, at least what I understand it doing, is like it's introducing us to the life of the mind. It's introducing us to the life of the philosopher. What does it mean to live a philosophic life, and what are the principles that we have to know to even really get started? And so it's interesting to me that then Alcibiades is the interlocutor here. Like, why would you not choose Plato? Now, I know Plato doesn't put himself in his dialogue, so we can kind of just like knee jerk react to that. But in reality, like, why is it not Plato? Wouldn't Plato be a much better example of like a student who's turned out well? Like, what is it about Alcibiades, do you think, that makes him a good person to be the interlocutor introducing philosophy to us?
Maybe because Alcibiades is relatable in that talented young adults are often full of ambition. They're things that they want to accomplish, and they are impatient to be accomplishing those things. And I mean, we see it nowadays where sometimes students choose not to go to college, think that maybe that's a waste of 4 years. And even when they're in college, they're just kind of always looking forward to the real world, when they can start having a career, when they can start making a difference in the world. And it's very difficult for a young adult to say, oh, I'm going to put my life on pause for 4 years and just study and learn things. And that's the situation Alcibiades is in, right? As the dialogue portrays him, he's right on the cusp of manhood, is kind of has plans to enter into Athenian political life very soon. Thinks he's well positioned to do so. And Socrates is trying to say, wait, hold on. Don't get involved in politics yet. You need to learn a bunch of things and form yourself before you do, right? In a way, anybody who's about to get an education, whether it's an education in the Platonic Academy or liberal arts college now, right? It's kind of being told you should put your life on pause for a little while and learn and gain a formation. So Alcibiades serves the purpose well for that reason.
I like that because I think that particularly like the first time I read it, I almost saw Alcibiades as having almost that like teenage angst. Like he's ready. He's ready to jump in. And I think that's really interesting that that would be a factor why Plato chose him. What do you think the role of the political is here? Because that's another thing that's fascinating to me about First Alcibiades is that in this introduction of philosophy, it can't be divorced from the question of the political.
Yeah, that's a good question. And uh, the relationship between philosophy and politics seems to be a central one in the Platonic corpus. The Apology, another Platonic dialogue that is often used as an introduction to philosophy, is also right about the relationship between the philosophic life and the political life. And then the masterpiece, the Republic, is to a large extent, once again, also about the relationship between the philosophic life and the political life. Yeah, why is that? It seems that part of the reason is that in order to do philosophy well, it's as if one has to check out of the political life for a while. Maybe we don't think of it, the political life, in as widespread of a phenomenon as the ancient Greeks did. We might just say practical life. In order to philosophize well, one has to set aside some time from the practical life to contemplate. And the demands of the practical life always seem kind of cogent, well-founded, irresponsible to ignore. How can I put aside, saving up for a down payment on a house so that I can have a family, right? Or how can I put aside this important work and just go contemplate? I suppose it's somewhat similar to prayer life. It always seems like there are pressing things that one needs to attend to, and prayer seems like a waste of time. I should be getting these things done, right? But you have to push things aside and make room for it, right? But the political life was in a democracy like ancient Athens was everyone's life, or at least every free man's life, in a way that maybe it's not in a gigantic country like America.
I like that a lot. But it's almost like Socrates has to pull him away from politics to say, okay, let's make sure your soul is well ordered, which is really the principle. Let's know thyself. Do you actually know yourself before you're going to step into the politics? But it seems then that it's not a retreat. It's not come be a Benedictine monk. It's not leave society. But it seems like philosophy in this Platonic sense is actually then preparing to send like in the best case scenario, would then almost send Alcibiades back into politics, but as a politician who loves wisdom, which makes me almost think that Alcibiades is a potential philosopher king.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's no escaping for anyone the influence of the political on their own formation as they're young, as they're children, and they're growing old. Good parents can provide a good formation, but it's always more difficult, and there's always kind of a mark left when the good parent is continually pushing against the current of a corrupt society and political life, right? Because none of us are self-sufficient, and not even a family is self-sufficient, right? It's the perfect community, right? The city or the polis or the country that serves as the community that any human and any child needs, right? So the philosopher can't not be concerned with the political. It's always an issue. How do you deal with it? What do you do? How much can you do? What's the ideal, and what do you do with a situation that's not ideal?
At the beginning of the dialogue, Socrates mentions his daemon, the divine sign. How does that? I'm really fascinated. Like, how do your students take that? Because I guess like if you're particularly now, I know you like St. Thomas as I do too, but it seems like a lot of times those who are more used to reading Thomas and Aristotle, particularly Aristotle, tend to view the pagan notion of God as like the unmoved mover. It's this God that's separated from the world. He doesn't. It's not really clear whether he cares about you or these kind of things. And then you read Plato, and it's like, no, I have a daemon, I have a spirit with me that God gave me, and God gave me a vocation, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Like it's much more relational. Like how do your student? I'm interested. Like how do your students over the years? How have they taken Socrates kind of not only appealing to a monotheistic God at the beginning, but saying I have a spirit, I have this daemon that's actually been telling me when not to speak, and now he says I can speak to you.
Yeah, I think that they find that interesting. They haven't made a lot of it. I I think there, the idea that this is his conscience, that is certainly uh, something that gets raised. Yeah, we haven't in the classroom, in our classes on Alcibiades, really dived into that aspect of the dialogue. But I think you're right that there's something rather important there. That there's a religious sense that shows that kind of manifests itself in Plato much more readily than it manifests in Aristotle. And I think that the students, as we read various dialogues and these things come up, they do ask, wait, is this kind of like a proto-Christianity, right? And
Right.
a lot of them get excited and think that, okay, so Plato is kind of like, what he's saying is like compatible with Christianity. And of course, then various differences, have to emerge over time. But I do think that there's something to that initial kind of reaction to Plato, that there's something very amenable to the Christian, something that feels, we can kind of feel a kinship with Plato in that regards. And I've always liked that. And I like that famous picture of the School of Athens where Plato's in the middle and he's pointing upwards and Aristotle's pointing forward. Plato is just religious. He's always thinking about the divine. And yeah, it's not just this abstract, unmoved mover thing. And I think there are elements in Aristotle where the religious aspect comes out a little bit. But all in all, it seems that Aristotle, although he's more precise and maybe gets the science better. I mean, I'm a Thomist, so of course I tend to favor Aristotle. There's maybe something healthier about Plato's attitude, and maybe there was a reason that the early church tended to focus on Plato and ignore Aristotle. There's a real sea change in the Middle Ages where the focus shifts to Aristotle.
What do you think though? Like just as you've taught this dialogue to your students, particularly of that generation, like what surprises them the most when they read it? Like what always catches their attention?
Well, I think that what they remark on most is how full of himself Alcibiades was and how badly he comes off looking, how much Socrates shows him up. So they seem to be really attuned to that kind of interpersonal dynamic, and they enjoy that. So they like seeing Socrates humiliate this arrogant young man. That's the thing they seem to remark on most. But they go ahead.
I was gonna say when they're commenting on that, is it dawning on them that that's one of the reasons that you have them read it is because you have this you have this man that has this pride that doesn't want to be broken down but needs to be broken down in order to be malleable to wisdom. Like does it click with them that like in this dialogue they are Alcibiades?
To a certain extent, but I think that many of them kind of uh, come in with an attitude that we're excited to be here at Wyoming Catholic College, so we're not going to be like the Alcibiades at first. We've already kind of embraced this, but I think maybe some of them, or maybe some of them have come in excited about other parts of the curriculum and are not so excited about the philosophy track yet. And they're like, oh, well, maybe philosophy is important.
Yeah, I guess there's kind of a slight difference between signing up to go to a college and then just be walking through Athens and an old man jumps you and starts explaining to you why you need to listen to him. There's probably a slight distinction there. What is it that when you read this with them, and here's these young people that have presented themselves to Wyoming Catholic College to be formed, like what is it that you're hoping that they receive out of the dialogue? Like what is it that you're really hoping as new students, as these kind of fledgling students of wisdom, what is it that you're really hoping that they see and kind of sink their teeth into in this dialogue?
Certainly the need to not think they know things that they don't know, right? Because that's one of the key parts, is that Socrates shows Alcibiades that it's not the people who know who end up failures, nor is it all of the people who don't know. It's the people who don't know and then think they know, and thus charge ahead and make blunders. So they should come to be aware of the need to recognize their own ignorance and own up to it, and that doing so is not a bad thing. And it doesn't have to be a humiliating thing. Socrates confesses to not knowing and needing cultivation, and he's not humiliated in the dialogue. But if they can realize that they are ignorant and need to learn things, and that feeling like they know is going to impede their ability to learn in any of the classes, and then to understand a little bit about what philosophy is and why they would need philosophy in particular, right? The focus certainly in the dialogue is on ethics, right? He's got to learn about virtue, but it's also self-knowledge, so philosophical anthropology, come to know what human beings are. But there's also I'd like to point out the appeal to metaphysics. It's kind of veiled, but there's a point where he says, well, we need to know what itself is in itself, right? And it's this kind of strange passage, and no student at that point could be anything but mystified by it. But if you know about other dialogues in the Platonic forms and the language that he uses to describe it, you realize, oh, he's saying we need to know about the Platonic forms, right? And say, look, he's talking about something that we call metaphysics. And this is actually like the highest part of philosophy. And that's something that you're going to study eventually in the curriculum. So I want them to come to want to learn the things that they're going to learn later in the curriculum.
I like that. I like that a lot. I can see that why that would be so important for the student. That one of the very first steps is to understand that you are ignorant, which is kind of a funny thing to come to understand, that I come to understand my own ignorance. Like there's a certain interesting juxtaposition there. And I think in the dialogue, I always feel like in Plato, like you've got to laugh a little bit. Like if you're actually reading these as a back and forth and you've humanized them, there's going to be some laughter. And that was a part that I really laughed out loud, was when he gets Alcibiades to realize that he's the most stupid person, because it's not only that you were talking about things that you didn't know about, but you thought you did, but then you're also talking about, you want to go talk about the highest things, which is the most stupid person. You're going to go talk to the Athenian assembly about justice, and you have no idea what justice is. And that's like a moment that you have to laugh, but it's a moment that you can see Socrates, the teacher, breaking down Alcibiades, but only to lift him up. There's kind of a beautiful destruction there of something that's unreal, something that's artificial. There's some kind of veneer there that kind of has to crack and fracture, so there can actually be real growth and real maturity. And I think that's one of the things in this dialogue that I deeply appreciated and very much loved it, as far as like a guidepost for the student, because you see these little moments in which Alcibiades has to be broken down. And like you said earlier, it's kind of easy to see it in Alcibiades. You're not at times terribly empathetic to him because he tends to be so prideful. But there's always an analogous way that we're the same way, right? There's always an analogy in me in which I am like Alcibiades. There's something that I'm very prideful about, that I'm really not open to formation on. I'm not actually malleable to it. And so he always serves as this analog to the student. And so I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it just as understanding the psyche maybe that word in the most kind of etymologically pure way of the student and what the student has to go through to even be ready to receive wisdom.
Yeah, that's right.
We mentioned earlier, which is another part that I kind of laughed, where because Alcibiades is like squirming at times. He's like he's like trying to get out of it, and it's comical. But probably one of the best moments is when he just admits, like, I'm better than everybody. Like, why do I need to do this? Like, I'm already better than everybody, etc. And Socrates, I'm interested in your thoughts here, because what I thought was going to happen was that Socrates was going to say, you need to be the best that you can be. You don't compare yourself to lower. You need to compare yourself to higher, and you have great potential, and therefore you need to be the best you can be. He doesn't do that, and in retrospect, I think he doesn't do that because Alcibiades doesn't know himself. We haven't gotten to that point yet, so Alcibiades can't be the best he can be because Alcibiades has no idea what that is, and so he then pivots then to this kind of like pseudo myth, this tale about the Spartans and the Persians and etc. Like, what is Socrates doing there with Alcibiades?
Yeah, that's a good question. My own sense of it is that he is appealing to Alcibiades' thumos, right? That Alcibiades is very competitive, and to a certain extent, that's a fault in Alcibiades. But Socrates thinks he can leverage this fault to turn Alcibiades right onto a good path and eventually rectify these faults. Alcibiades seems to want above all to be the winner, right? To be the one who gets the trophy, has the gold medal that everybody's applauds as being the best. But there's also a degree of laziness, it seems. I presume that's because he's lived a kind of a life of ease. He's wealthy. He's had lots of influential family members and friends. So he's probably used to getting his way and not needing to work very hard. That's also probably in part due to his superior native intelligence. Over the years, I've occasionally seen the brightest students end up doing the worst because they know they can skate by with very little work because they're smarter than the other students, and they can get a passing grade without putting in any effort, whereas other students might fail if they put in no effort. It seems to me Alcibiades is a little bit like that. He thinks he can. In this case, though, he thinks he can. He's so superior in intelligence. He can not only just skate by with very little effort, but he can be better than everyone with very little effort. And Socrates thinks he's got to leverage Socrates or Alcibiades' competitiveness by saying, "Hey, you know what? You actually the competition is way better than you think it is, right? You might you might lose and lose badly if you don't cultivate yourself and work hard."
I like a lot what you're saying there about leverage, because I think one of the things that we've talked about the student, but also there's a lot of lessons here for the teacher. And one of the things that I really noticed when I read the dialogue is Socrates kind of puts on this masterclass of being able to step into the love of the student and understand what it is that they love and use that as a lure to come back. Because Socrates doesn't jump out at the beginning and be like, Alcibiades, you need to be a philosopher and you need to love wisdom. Alcibiades isn't going to follow him. So what's he do? He reaches out with this lure of, oh, you want victory, you want honor, you want glory. Me and my God can give you that. Now, Alcibiades has no idea how he's going to do that or what that actually means, but he's actually doesn't have the capacity to receive that right now. And so I think this is something that I think is really interesting, is like there are lessons here for teachers about like, what is it, how do you reach a student and how can you step into the love of that student, right? What is it that they love? What's their eros, right? What's their erotic appetite actually seeking? Can you see that and read that in their soul and kind of use that to kind of reorient them towards like some kind of greater good?
I think that's right. And that shows up in really all the Platonic dialogues. Socrates is just so admirable in that regards. He's being a teacher is not just about having a mastery of the material and knowing stuff. It's a deeply interpersonal thing. And so one has to be attuned to the persons with whom one is dealing, the students, and the personal element of that relationship. And in many ways, that's a lot harder to do than to just have mastery of the material and be able to teach it in that way. So yeah, Socrates, he tells us teachers, or he shows us teachers, that we have to have our eyes out for what's going on in the soul of the student. And that's a difficult thing.
It is. I'm kind of curious, what was your introduction to the first Alcibiades? Was this how you were introduced to Plato? Is this something you came into later? Like, what was your introduction to this dialogue?
Yeah, no, I had never read Alcibiades until I came to Wyoming Catholic College. So
Really?
as part of my learning experience at WCC as well, I was introduced to Plato maybe in grade school with the Euthyphro, Apology, Crito, Phaedo, the last days of Socrates. And there's a lot to be said for that way of introducing Plato. There's certainly a lot of high drama there that can make one fall in love with Socrates and the philosophic way of life. And then I read lots of Platonic dialogues in college, at Thomas Aquinas College, most of them in freshman year. And that was a good introduction to Plato. I read many Platonic dialogues on my own in later years. And then as a new teacher at another institution, I was teaching the Republic semester after semester. But Alcibiades, I never turned to it, in part because in the table of contents, it's got that little asterisk next to it.
Right.
It's like, well, I don't know. They're not sure it's Plato. Maybe I'll read a different dialogue. But I am glad to have read it now, and it serves its purpose well as an introduction to philosophy.
Yeah, it really just seems like a lost gem. Like I mentioned earlier, like the attack on the authorship then kind of casts this pall over it. Meanwhile, like when you read, the ancients, they're turning to it first and foremost, because it really is now. Because I'm a new reader to it as well. I just read it to prepare actually for Ascend, the Great Books podcast, kind of entrance and studies into Plato. And so I'm very much a new reader of it as well. And now I feel like I've stumbled upon some treasure that everyone should know. Like, you love Plato, but you haven't read First Alcibiades. Like, how could you? Well, it's because, like you said, there's that little asterisk there. And so people set it aside. And also I think too, or maybe, feel free to push back on this, but I think too is how we approach philosophy. So First Alcibiades is very much showing you philosophy as a way of life. Mm-hmm. It's showing you philosophy as like a moral formation of, can we be noble, and wise and prudent as a human, like achieve a certain human excellence. And if your goal to read Plato is just to extricate somewhat coldly philosophical principles from the dialogues, mm-hmm. like it doesn't seem to me that First Alcibiades is going to hold a lot of weight for someone like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. A lot of the other dialogues, although they've got this personal drama, the philosophy is a way of life built into them, right? The Republic, for example, it's like he's trying to pull in Glaucon and Adeimantus, right? And then there's Thrasymachus as an enemy, and he tames him and ends up being friendly later, right? So the philosophy as a way of life is there in other dialogues, but you can extract arguments. But it strikes me that the Apology is going to be a lot like the Alcibiades in this regards, where the Apology, unlike, say, the Euthyphro, people don't walk away with like the argument, right? The Euthyphro dilemma or whatever. There's no like apology dilemma or the apology argument, right? Like there might be like the Meno argument, right? The teaching the slave boy, about the square. Yeah, but I guess the apology has more drama to it. And the Alcibiades, as I said before, you kind of have to know a little bit about history to see the drama, because the drama is not like there as much in the dialogue. Whereas with the Apology, the drama is all right there.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct. What do you think about the very beautiful image of, well, we need to know ourselves. We need to know, and if we say we know ourselves, we need to know the soul. That's because that's who we are, particularly for Plato. We are the soul. But if the body wants to know itself, it looks into a mirror. That's how it knows itself. So we need a mirror for the soul.
Yeah.
And he kind of pivots and says, well, we find this in the eyes of the lover. Someone looks at us, and in the eyes of the lover, that is the mirror. We see ourselves back into them, kind of as the beloved, and we start to see ourselves and get to know ourselves through the eyes of another. And I find this like really fascinating because it shows that the philosophic life in a certain way is communal. Like
Yes.
we can't see it ourselves. Like God
Definitely.
has
Yeah.
made us. We have a nature that actually has to rely on the others in our life. I think that his analogy here, I'm certainly not against it. I think it's very beautiful, but I actually don't think it precludes other relationships. So, for instance, like when I was thinking about this, I think it's probably true in a student-teacher relationship in the context he gives it, but also like I think it's really true in the father-to-child relationship. I think when I look, when my 4-year-old boy looks into my eyes, and I tell him, "You are a smart boy. You are a brave boy. Right? I love you." He he is seeing himself in my eyes and coming to know and love himself. I think some of the things that Plato says here about student teacher run in all kinds of different relationships that we
That's right.
have, right? It's very much true in husband and wife as well, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how much we come to know ourselves. And even in that, um, Pope Benedict XVI talks about this. Eros, right? This we've been talking about eros, this love. Eros is a need love. It's a self love. It wants to be satiated, right? We want to satiate in beauty and be happy. But marriage is really interesting because, particularly bringing in the Hebrew understanding, when we then marry, even as a natural institution, it extends my eros to the other because we become one body. And so my need love, my self love actually brings my wife into that. And so even in seeing her in her eyes and I come to know myself, she also becomes myself in a certain way. And all this kind of happens even within the natural realm. So I think at least one thing I would like to explore as I've been kind of digesting this dialogue is that the analogies that he gives here, I think, play throughout multiple different relationships.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in the father son or father daughter relationship, as you said, child comes to know who he or she is by being known by the parents. But I have certainly also experienced that my children bring me face to face with my own faults, right? Because I see them in them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they teach me about who I am as well. And it seems that the same thing is going to be true with teacher student relationships, is that they learn from each other about who they are. And it's also got to be the case that any person who's engaged in the philosophic life is going to need not just relationships with um, students, with people who are younger in the intellectual life, but needs also like friends and colleagues who are more like peers who can come to know each other and each other's minds through dialoguing with each other. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the 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 philosophical life can't be lived well in isolation, and that's kind of a challenge because it's easy for those who are living an academic life to kind of isolate themselves, right? Get kind of wrapped up in their own work, but yeah, we need relationships with other people, so we can see ourselves in the mirror and be a mirror to other people.
Well, there's just something so thoroughly, well, this is probably maybe too strong, but there's something thoroughly anti modern about this understanding because we've
Yeah.
atomized ourselves so thoroughly where, I mean, I'm not a Descartes scholar, but this also came to mind where Descartes, to understand his philosophy, just goes off by himself in a cabin or whatever, and he's just going to sit there and think. Right? There's no either
Yeah.
the other. It's just him, and he goes inward to find these things. But even in a lot of the other fictions of like human anthropology that the moderns tend to take up, so many of them are highly atomized. Like we don't really need anyone else. It's just me. It's individualistic. And so here for Plato to really point out like, no, you need the eyes of the lover to come to know yourself. That's the mirror of the soul. It's I don't know if we're really understanding how profound that statement is about human nature and what it means. I mean, Aristotle says certain things that I like the poetic. I like Plato. Aristotle, though, is very helpful at times just to kind of just come out and just say it. So the fact that like we are political animals, we are social animals. Like we aren't. I actually thought about Aristotle in this section where he talks about, that you have to be either a beast or a god to live outside the city.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you kind of see that in this moment of, well, no, because you need the eyes of the other to come to know yourself and to live a good life and do these kind of things. And if you're just going to divorce yourself from everyone else, then yeah, you either have to be divine in some capacity, or you're going to kind of plummet into some type of bestial reality. So I think that, yeah, that this is something that like I want to continue to think about, because I also think it also has some implications even for the symposium and the ladder of love. But there's something here that I think is quite beautiful. When you get to this point with your students, like how do you really bring home why we need to know ourselves? Like why is this the beginning of the philosophical life?
Good question. We'll certainly walk through Socrates' own argument for that, right? Like you can't take care of yourself unless you know who you are. You can't know what belongs to you, what doesn't belong to you, if you don't know who you are. So how can you even take care of what belongs to you? So I don't know. I think that the times when I have taught that, maybe I haven't sufficiently emphasized that point. Although, I have drawn attention to it, and it comes up again in the apology, right? Know thyself. I guess we all have choices that we can make in our life, and given the way things work, we can only really make choices and direct ourselves. Everything else we have at best indirect control over. My kids find that really frustrating because they, will really hard that their brother, give them that toy or agree with them about whatever it is they're arguing over, right? And no matter how hard they wish it, and no matter how forcefully they say it, it doesn't seem to change their brother's behavior. Right. So each person has control most directly only over himself. Right. So that means that we have to take care of ourselves first and foremost. So really the only thing we can take care of is ourselves. So we better get to know who we are. Otherwise, we're going to make poor decisions and not really do a good job with anything.
Yeah, it seems too that there's, it's a crude analogy, but it seems to, as I've been kind of explaining it to people and trying to kind of show them like maybe just a practical reality, because I also teach in our diaconate formation program, and we're very blessed that our diaconate formation program has a great books sequencing that is attached to it. And so we find ourselves being very much in compliance with our Holy Father's letter on literature and the formation of clerics in the Diocese of Tulsa, because we're reading these ancient and modern texts. But one of the things there that we kind of talked about, like just on a really practical level of trying to understand this, is like, Alcibiades in a lot of ways is trying to improve himself, but he doesn't know himself. And what is that like? And it's like, well, imagine someone trying to be like, well, I'm going to make this engine better. I'm trying to work on my car. I'm trying to improve my car. Oh, really? That's great. What does this part do? I have no idea. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You see immediately the problem of you have to have this knowledge as an antecedent before you can, self-cultivate, before you can grow in virtue. Like how are you going to use prudence to perfect your intellect and its love of truth and its pursuit of wisdom if you don't even understand how any of this works. And I think that, I think that even though it seems like really simple to us, I think we see it in our culture all the time, where people are off and they're waxing long about what we should do or what we should do in society or what they should do, or we give other people advice or we do whatever. And it literally is like it's a bunch of car mechanics running around telling you how to fix your car. And then you say, okay, well, great. Well, what's this part do? I have no idea. Well, what's this part do? I have no idea. No, like, let's stop. Like, let's know ourselves. Like, come to know, like, how does my soul function? What are the parts of my soul? What are the loves? What virtues perfect those loves? Like, how do I actually start to order my eros? And I think that, in a certain way, it shows, I think it really dovetails well into Christianity. I think it really does, that we have to know ourselves and know who we are. I think this is something that we've been talking about recently with myself and some of my friends about, like, even how we evangelize now. If you tell someone like, well, Jesus died for you, it's like, well, great. Why? Well, because you're a sinner and you're in need of like a savior. Like that narrative doesn't make sense to people anymore because they don't see themselves as sinners. They don't even see themselves in need of anything. They're perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And so to know thyself in this natural kind of Platonic way, is kind of what I would say is an observation of our nature, seems to be this kind of first step of the philosophic life, tends to also be a preliminary step to understanding our need for salvation and our need for grace. Do I truly understand myself and the defects that I have? And you kind of see St. Paul getting into this too. St. Paul tends to understand that, the things that he wants to do, he doesn't do, and the vice versa. And so he sees that he's struggling internally with himself, and he sees the need then for a certain level of grace. And I think that this is really an antecedent in a lot of ways to being receptive to the gospel.
Yeah, that's right. But we have to know two things. We have to know our brokenness and our need and the kind of sorry state that we're in. But we also have to know the greatness that we were made for. We have to know that there's actually something more, something much more than the good things we've got and the good things that have seemed within our reach that we're aiming for. And with St. Augustine, the Confessions opens with, right, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Right away, there's an appeal to, we're not just made to like kind of enjoy ourselves in this life, have a successful career, get along with other colleagues and what have you, and maybe have a nice house and car or something like that. We're actually made to sit down at table with the Lord of the universe, right? That somehow we can be divinized, right? There's a way in which Plato is doing, or Socrates is doing something like that in the Alcibiades, right? He's certainly showing Alcibiades the sorry state that he's in. We focused a lot on that. There's also an appeal to that there's something divine, and we need to look at the soul and the most divine part in the soul, right? There's a kind of call upwards to something more. You're in a sorry state now, and you need help, but there's also this greatness that you haven't even yet conceived of that you're called to.
Yeah, because I agree. You see Socrates doing that with Alcibiades. Come to me and my God will give you, glory and honor and fame and etc. But, it's unclear entirely, that might include some of the glory and fame that Alcibiades desires in the present. But it also, I think, mainly would include a lot of glory and being spirited and things like this that Alcibiades doesn't quite fathom right now, because the soul all works together. So like you have to be spirited to live the philosophic life. Like you have to have courage to be a philosopher. You think about Plato's cave, right? The capacity of the individual to turn away from the cave wall and to ascend out of the cave is arduous. Education is difficult. And so, the soul's not, we talk about the parts of the soul and what their loves and et cetera, but they're not isolated from one another. And so, the higher always perfects the lower. And so as you kind of move up the soul, I think that Alcibiades, why the reasons he could make a great philosopher is actually because he's very spirited, because he has this courage, right? So as we kind of look at the dialogue as a whole, you kind of have your own experience teaching it to your students at Wyoming Catholic College. As they're learning first Alcibiades, they're learning horsemanship, they're learning all kinds of things to kind of introduce them to living a good life. What is the good, and what does it mean to live a good life? Any kind of parting thoughts or final conclusions or lessons about first Alcibiades?
Yeah, and I guess the thought that's occurring to me now is, as you speak, is that there's one of the three parts of the soul that is delineated in the Republic is seems to be mostly missing in the dialogue, right? There's a lot of appeal to the spiritedness. And as you pointed out earlier, there seems to be an appeal also to the appetitive part of the soul, right? But what about the highest part of the soul, right? Where the intellect is, the reason, the part that is supposed to know and then rule, right, in the Republic. Well, it seems that Alcibiades, although he's got he's very intelligent, he's got that part of his soul is very much present and powerful, but he has so little experience with it, yet he doesn't yet understand the attraction of the pursuit of wisdom. And Socrates makes the argument mainly in terms of, you need to know about things like justice so that you can, advise the Athenian people and be a leader. But right, he plays on his curiosity a little bit, right, with that line where he's like, well, we need to know what the itself in itself is, right? This very enigmatic line that, of course, Alcibiades has no idea what he's talking about. But presumably his reaction is going to be, wait, what is this thing that you're talking about, right? That you're tiptoeing around, right? He's trying to waken up a desire for wisdom in the soul of Alcibiades, but he can't go straight there. So that third part of the soul, it too yearns for something, and one has to wake that yearning up. And it seems true in an even deeper level that all of us are yearning for a relationship with God, our Father, but a lot of us don't know it yet, and that has to be woken up, and you can't always go straight there.
Very good. No, I like that a lot. Well, Dr. Shields, we really appreciate you being here today. We appreciate you kind of guiding us and leading us through your experience of teaching first Alcibiades to your students at Wyoming Catholic College, which sounds like a wonderful, wonderful place. Any place that people can find you and more of your work? Do you have a website? Do you have Twitter? Do you have anything like that? Or are you smart and stay away from all that?
I mostly stay away from it. I do have a website. It's updated very infrequently. danielshields.info. I am on academia.edu just as a place to kind of park my CV. People are interested in knowing what I've written. They can find that there. But yeah, those would be the places to look.
Okay, well, very good. We appreciate you being here today.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everyone. Next week, we will continue in our studies of Plato, and we will be reading Plato's Euthyphro. So if you want to join us, read the Euthyphro, and we'll be discussing it over the next couple weeks. All right, everyone. You can check us out on thegreatbookspodcast.com, on Twitter or X, YouTube, Patreon, and Facebook, if I ever remember to actually update it. And we will see you next week. Thank you.